I'm Dr. Craig Escude, the host of IDD Health Matters, a podcast where we talk about health, wellness, and health equity for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Hope you enjoy it. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the IDD Health Matters podcast. I have a wonderful guest today, Dr. Laura Brackin. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Craig.
So we're coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona. As you can see out here, it's beautiful. And from the NASDS conference, the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services. That's a mouthful. And you were a previous state director at one point.
Previous director in the state of Louisiana.
So let's start there. Tell us about that experience and how you got into the field of working with and supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Well, I've always wanted to work with people with disabilities. I don't know why. I just always have. And when I originally started out in college, I said, well, you want to work with people with disabilities? Teach. So I went into special education. But then I realized I love teaching, but I wanted to make a bigger difference. And so throughout my career, I've actually worked in advocacy, running the state chapter of the ARC of Louisiana. I've worked in policy, Governor's Office of Disability Affairs, ran that in Louisiana. Worked in the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, trying to get money from the federal government to create programs for people with disabilities, and then also led Louisiana's Office for Citizens with Developmental Disabilities from the policy perspective.
So you've got a lot of experience in this field. You've probably seen lots of evolution over the years. Were there any highlights or really exciting moments that you can recall during those times, or maybe things that really changed the system in a positive direction?
I think that the biggest change that I've seen over the long haul is the more focus on people being in natural environments in the community, not in institutions or segregated settings. And that's the biggest change that I've seen. And even though I've seen a lot of change, I've also seen some things that we talk about, and that don't seem to change. And there's certainly
lots of things to continue to work on to improve overall supports and services. I would agree with you there too.
Absolutely.
And I would say the same thing is, when I first started in this field, I'm not ashamed to say I knew nothing about it. And as a healthcare provider, that was kind of challenging and a little bit disheartening. I'm like, why wasn't I taught this? So I learned a lot the hard way, but also not understanding community supports and services, and why should we even move to that? Because I had to learn these things, and there are lots of great reasons to have people more integrated into society. We all want that, right? But there are lots of challenges when it comes to supporting people in different environments, and so it sounds like a lot of the work that you do, and I know a lot of the work that we all do in this field, is trying to figure out the best ways to do that, to help people live lives they want to live. Yeah.
Right.
So, Laura, I think I recall you saying you've got a personal story that has kind of shaped your thoughts on supporting people with IDD, and if you don't mind, would you share that with us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. So, as you know, I've been in this field for so many years in different positions, and when I look back at my career, I think I've always been someone who was very much focused on listening to families and hearing their stories and hearing their experiences, and using that to kind of help shape advocacy efforts and help shape policy changes. So I always believed in listening to the voice of families. But it wasn't until about 2.5-3 years ago that when our second grandchild was born, Jude, that my eyes were opened up in this field in a different way. And Jude was born with a rare genetic disorder called Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome. Almost no one has heard of it.
That must be a pretty rare one. I'm not familiar with that one.
Right. Yeah. So many people have never heard of it. But what's really interesting about this disorder is that I've learned so much. Prior to Jude's diagnosis, I thought that cholesterol was a bad thing and that you got most of it from food. And I was
but
so
you
wrong.
Also need it for other things.
Well, what I have learned is that your body makes the majority of the cholesterol that's in your body, and that every cell in your body needs cholesterol, especially your brain. I think they say about 80% of the cholesterol that's used is used in your brain. And so Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome is a condition where your body doesn't make the cholesterol that it needs. And so because every cell needs it, it doesn't get that cholesterol to develop the way that it needs to. And so Jude has what I call so it impacts every single cell in your body. So I say that Jude has all the ologists. So he's got a cardiologist, he's got a gastroenterologist, he's got a pulmonologist, he's got a neurologist, and of course he's got all the therapists, dentists, geneticists. He has doctors that I didn't even know existed.
So how does it manifest? What do we see if a person has this?
So it affects development. A lot of kids with SLOS tend to be a lot smaller, so there's a separate growth chart for them. A lot have muscle tone, but it is a spectrum disorder, so you can have a lot of deformities. You can have some facial deformities, cleft palate, cleft lip. You can have vision issues. You can have heart issues, and webbed fingers, webbed toes. With Jude's condition, there were very, very minimal physical signs, but he struggled when he was first born to eat, which lots of babies struggle. So, I mean, it wasn't diagnosed immediately.
Away.
As a matter of fact, he got very ill within 2 weeks of being born and wound up in an ICU for a while. My daughter describes that as almost being incarcerated because it's tough to be there and not want to leave or be able to leave, but he was really, really sick, and then we knew that he was struggling with his development. We just didn't know why. Thankfully, we were able to get him into early intervention pretty quickly, I think about 4 months of age, and but didn't have the diagnosis until probably about 6 months of age.
That's what I was going to ask you. When did he get diagnosed?
Sent him to a geneticist, and they did some testing. And the geneticist was actually surprised with the diagnosis because he had seen 1 or 2 cases, but there was a lot of physical indications of Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome that he was able to pick on with other cases, but not with Jude's case. And so, Jude is making progress, and it's really amazing to see. I call it like little miracles all the time of seeing the progress that he's making. But it's opened my eyes to see things in ways that I've never seen before. And I'll give you an example. So most of the work that I've done in this field has been with adults. So working with day programs and shelter workshops and transitioning those shelter workshops and transitioning people into community-based employment and into more community integrated settings. And I would run into families that were very resistant. Not my child. My child can't work in the community. My child can't live independently. My child can't. And at the time, I struggled with that. I really had a hard time. Well, it would get frustrated.
And part of the work that we do is we want to help people say, you can do these things.
Yes. So. I've spent a lot of time going with Jessica and Jude to the different doctor's appointments, and then sometimes taking him to therapy when she was working or Joseph, Dad, was working. And you would just hear so many things about all that Jude can't do or won't be able to do. The limitations, yes. And you also hear a lot of contradictions from one doctor to the other. And no matter how positive you are going into those things, because I'm definitely you can, we will. This is, reach for the highest, reach for your highest potential. But it was so deflating. And so by going to some of those appointments with her, I was able to see that in a way that I've never seen before, even though I've heard families talk about it. It was experiencing it. And so what I realized is that, I was getting sucked into, even though I knew better, even though I've been in this field and believe so much in the abilities of people and how we can support people to reach their highest potential, I was getting sucked into, he can't. And it's easy when they're a baby because no newborns hold a bottle. So that's a good example.
They can't do them
No newborns hold a bottle. You hold the bottle for them. And so I was like, we'll hold the bottle for the newborn. But then the newborn turns like a month old and 2 months old, and he can't hold the bottle. So we continue to hold the bottle. So we were I was assuming he couldn't. And so I did it for him. I got sucked into that. And then one day I realized, if I continue to assume this, he never will. He never will. And so Jude was one early on where if you tried to get him to hold something, or if you put something in his hand, he would pull back. Okay. It was an immediate reaction. And so little by little, we started bringing his hands to the bottle and trying to get him to put his hands on the bottle. And he pulled back. And then finally, we got him to feel a little bit more comfortable. A lot of little experiences of putting his hands on the bottle. And then we would hold his hands on the bottle because he was having some difficulty supporting the bottle. We did that for a while. And then eventually, he started holding the bottle.
But if you had always held it for him and never helped him to learn how to do it, he would have never learned that ability, that
exactly.
skill.
And so it's almost embarrassing to tell the story because I figure if anybody knows better, I know better. But I got sucked into that from that going to those doctor's appointments. I got sucked into the he can't, and do for him. And
it helps, I think, for supporters in this field to understand that perspective of people, because sometimes we look at someone and say, well, their family never taught them to do this, or they didn't help them with this, or whatever it is, and it's like there's a lot more to any story in the picture, and I can see what you're saying about how easy it could be to get kind of sucked in when all you're hearing from everyone is he can't. I was like, well, okay, he can't, so we'll do it for him.
Yes.
And I think that philosophy is probably pretty widespread in this field, and even though we're all working to change it, we can see how easy it is to fall into it.
Yes.
Yeah. So how's he doing now?
He's doing really well. So it's really interesting. So SLOS is a spectrum disorder. There are a lot of kids with SLOS who have an intellectual disability, and that use a wheelchair, that are tube fed. Jude is eating.
Great.
Which is really good. I call them small miracles. I feel like we're constantly being blessed with small miracles with Jude, and we try to celebrate each of those miracles. So another interesting thing that I learned about Jude is about a year ago, I noticed that his behavior just seemed to be a little bit fussier than on a more regular basis than he was. Almost like mini temper tantrums. But he was almost 2. So all babies have 2-year-olds throw temper tantrums, right? But I happened to mention this to his speech therapist when I was bringing him one day, and we call her Miss Caitlin. So I was mentioning to Caitlin, and she said, well, we could try starting him on a communication device. And he was maybe 20 months, and I thought, okay. I mean, I wasn't used to working with babies.
Early. Yeah.
Seemed really early. So she started working with him on that communication device, and it's now 1 year later, so he's a little over 2.5 now. Not only does he use that communication device, he can navigate multiple pages on it, put together 3-word sentences, and I'm so thankful, because when we see him start to get upset about something, his mom, Jessica, or his dad will say, let me get your talker for you, and give it to him. He will stop acting up the minute you say that you're going to grab, where's the talker? Let's grab the talker. He will stop. He knows that it's coming, and then the minute that he gets it, he's very concentrated on pushing, what he wants. And
what an amazing testimony to how behavior is a form of communication, and we as supporters have to recognize that. and the person's adverse or a behavior or whatever we want to, what term we want to use, it could be because there's pain, there's an underlying medical problem, an underlying dental problem. It could be because there's a social situation that they're in that they can't communicate it, or it could be just the fact that they need to communicate something and they can't.
Well, you'll appreciate this with your medical background. So I guess about a month ago, now I think his daddy had taken him this particular time to therapy, but he was a little bit crankier than normal, and Miss Caitlin brought out the talker, the communication device, and he pushed Miss Caitlin feel sick.
Wow.
My daughter took him to the doctor, and he had a terrible ear infection.
Wow.
But he wasn't running fever. There were no other signs, but he felt bad. But to be able to communicate that is just unbelievable.
That happens all too often in this field, and it is so wonderful that you saw the possibility that communication could be the reason for his challenges, and he got started early, and he learned how to do it, and now he can communicate his needs. That's amazing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It is. It pains me to think about people that aren't able to have a voice in things and are not able to communicate. And I'm so thankful that we were able to find a way for Jude to communicate at such an early age, because they talk about 2-year-olds, they're the ones that throw temper tantrums a lot. Well, I'm not an early childhood expert at all. That I'm focused more on adults, but it makes me really wonder about just with any 2-year-old throwing temper tantrums. Is it because their intellect is advanced enough that they know what they want, but they cannot communicate
don't know how to
it,
communicate
and so
it.
it's the frustration. But then it also makes me think about, all right, well, kids that were brought up years ago who maybe didn't have any type of intervention, accommodations, or assistive technology to help them communicate. They learned early on at 2, at 3, that how they eventually get what they want or need is through the behavior, is through the temper tantrums, and they continue to not be able to communicate it, so they continue those behaviors that worked for them at 2.
I think you're right on
3.
point with that.
And so I'm just so thankful that we found something that worked for Jude.
What an amazing story, and such an important story that people who work in this field need to hear and need to understand. I'm Dr. Craig Escude, President of Intellectability. State developmental disability agencies, managed care organizations, and providers across the United States use Intellectability's health risk screening tool, e-learn courses, and person-centered training to improve health equity for people with IDD. Visit replacingrisks.com to learn more about how you can employ these tools with people you support. I always ask guests to talk about 3 things that you want the world to know, that you think would help improve supports and services or health and wellness for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I'm really anxious to hear your insights.
Okay, so I don't know if I could stick to 3, but
I tell you what, you have a license to give to say as many as you want. How about that?
So I think that, from all of the years of experience, but mostly the experience of learning with Jude and in using those experiences with everything else that I've learned over the years, I would say assume that they can, and maybe they will.
Yeah.
But if you assume that they can't, then they probably never will.
Never won't. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
never will.
And one thing I've talked, my daughter and I have talked about is that we don't want to make Jude disabled by not exposing him to things, not supporting him to do whatever it is, and limiting opportunities for him. By limiting those opportunities and assuming that he can't, that you can make someone disabled, and we don't want to do that. So
that is such an important philosophy for everyone, including the doctors that are seeing people with disabilities, because you heard from them, he won't be able to. But if you heard from them, well, he has some challenges, but we can work through those and he'll be able to, that would have probably changed the whole perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So definitely assume that he can, and don't get sucked into the mindset of he can't.
Yeah.
Of he can't. Probably the second thing that I would say is communication is critical. And I shared the example of Jude and the talker and Miss Caitlin. Miss Caitlin feels sick, but it's not just about illness. It's about things that they enjoy in life and preferences. So I have to say that I don't know if you know anything about children and what they like to watch on TV, but there's Miss Rachel.
It's been a
and
while,
that Miss
but
Rachel
I do
button.
know, I have a couple of grandchildren too. I know the Miss Rachel.
Yes, that Miss Rachel. This is also interesting. So with communication is critical. A couple of weeks ago, they were at our house, and he had been watching Miss Rachel. It was time to eat, and my daughter had said to him, "All right, Jude, no more Miss Rachel for right now. It's time to eat." But she always makes sure that he has his talker right there while he's eating, so that he could choose foods or let her know when he's done. And so she had said, "No more Miss Rachel for now." And he went and pushed, "Miss Rachel, more, please, more." and we had to give in.
Yeah, that's normal parenting. We give in sometimes.
Right, but it was just so awesome that he was communicating.
Able to communicate that.
Yes, about what he wanted and how much he wanted it, So communication, find a way, no matter how small it is. It doesn't have to be find a way to give choices, to let someone have a voice, and to be able to communicate however they can communicate.
And that speaks so much to person-centered supports.
Yes.
Helping to balance what a person might need with what they want and enjoy in life. And I love that the field is really focusing more and more on that. And that's perfect. You gave great examples as to why it's so important. And there are studies that when people are supported in a more person-centered way, they have less adverse behaviors, less emergency room visits even, and things along those lines. So it's what we all want, right? Don't we all want choice in life?
Yes.
Yes, so do people with disabilities.
Everybody does, right. So I think the third thing that I would probably say is, the importance of early intervention. I am so thankful for early intervention, and I do not know where Jude would be at this point if he did not have early intervention. I am so thankful I mentioned Miss Caitlin, but he has another Miss Tam that goes to his daycare, that is just so good with him about giving choices, supporting him in a natural way, supporting him to play, to interact. He has a physical therapist, Miss Bailey, who I love her attitude. Her attitude is he doesn't walk yet.
There you go.
He doesn't crawl yet. It's there's no limits. She places no limits on what he will do, and so it is good to have professionals around you. But all of these folks are early intervention specialists that have given a life to Jude. And that is, I just can't even imagine where we would be without them. And so for state agencies, I ran Louisiana's Office for Citizens with Developmental Disabilities, and under that was the Early Steps or Early Intervention Program. I knew the data on how good early intervention is.
When you see it in action,
when you see it in real life, and you think about where that person would be without that early intervention, it is life changing. It's not just good. It is life changing. And so that early intervention and the importance of funding early intervention and the importance of accessing early intervention. So, my daughters run into people that have a child with a disability who are 2 and haven't even heard about early intervention yet. And so the importance of professionals referring people to early intervention, whether it's daycare, whether it's family practitioners, whomever, to refer them to early intervention so that they can get that support that they need, is so important. And for families, it doesn't matter whether they have a diagnosis or not. Jude didn't have a diagnosis when he was referred to early intervention. We just knew that there was some delays, and we wanted to get on top of it as soon as possible. And thank goodness we did.
Laura, you shared some very personal insights, and I want to thank you, your daughter and son-in-law, and Jude as well for sharing such an inspirational story that I really think will impact people. And you've done so many things in this field, and to be able to add this little kind of different slant to it is, I think, very, very impactful. And I hope everyone out there hears the story and takes a piece of it home with them and it will help them to support people that they work with just a little bit of a different perspective.
Yes.
Thank you so much. The IDD Health Matters podcast is a production of Intellectability. Learn more about our health risk reduction tools and training for supporters of people with IDD by visiting replacingrisk.com.